Now, loved ones, it's just a different kind of book. It's a book of facts, not a book of personal subjective visions. You may say, well, yeah, but I mean the facts that are in this book, how do you know that they're the facts that actually occurred? And that is a problem. You can see that. Because these facts occurred thousands of years ago. Well, I mean, you can see there was lots of time for all kinds of people to write up imaginary accounts of these facts, to make up their own stories of the facts, to mutilate the facts, to pervert them. Maybe they could take an ordinary man like Moses and they could make him seem to be a great leader. And you can see how easy it is to do that when you consider that the original accounts of the facts were written on manuscript material that was very destructible. And so the manuscripts were destroyed every maybe 50, 60 years, and they had to be recopied. So you can see that it's difficult to tell whether somebody made a mistake in the copying or whether somebody changed it when they copied it. And it's the same, of course, with all ancient history. It's really a great problem. Most of us know Plato's Republic. Plato wrote his Republic in 400 BC. But would you believe that the first manuscript we have of Plato's Republic is 900 AD? So there were 1,300 years elapsed there before we have a manuscript of Plato's Republic. Now, obviously, there were many manuscripts before then, but the only one that exists today in our world, all the rest have been destroyed, the only one that exists is 900 AD. And it's the same with most of the ancient history, you know. You go to Caesar's Gallic Wars, or you go to Homer's poetry. We believe Homer's poetry, which was written in 900 BC, and the first manuscript, and the only manuscript we have earlier than 1000 AD is one at 900 AD. So it's about 1800 years or 2000 years after Homer wrote the poetry that we have a manuscript of it. And do you know how many manuscripts we have of Homer's poetry altogether? 2. 2 manuscripts. And yet, of course, we don't question Homer's poetry. But you can see why even the history department of our own university regard anything up to 200 years after the event as eyewitness accounts. You can see that. Because ancient history is lamentable, really, in its documentary support. And yet, of course, we don't question it. So if you want to look, loved ones, there is a picture of some of the typical examples in our own literature today. You can see that Caesar's Gallic Wars, 55 BC, and there are only 9 manuscripts. And the first one is 900 years later than Caesar wrote his Gallic Wars. Then you see Livy's history, written in 20 BC, and we have only 20 manuscripts of it. And the first one is 400 years after Livy wrote the history. Then Tacitus's history was written in 100 AD. We have only 2 manuscripts. And the first one is 1,000 years after Tacitus wrote the history. Thucydides' history was written in 430 BC. And there are only 8 manuscripts, and the first one is 1,300 years later. Plato's Republic, 4 manuscripts, 1,300 years after he wrote the book. Homer's Odyssey, written in 900 BC, only 2 manuscripts. And the oldest one written 2,000 years later. Loved ones, what about the Bible? Well, it's just unbelievable. There it is. The New Testament was written from 40 to 100 AD. We have 4,000 manuscripts of it. 4,000 different manuscripts. And the unbelievable thing is the earliest one was written 25 years after John's Gospel was completed. But do you see? 4,000 different manuscripts. In other words, if somebody wanted to change the history of the New Testament, he had to have a very large family who could travel into all kinds of hidden, concealed caves in the deserts, because these manuscripts are found in all kinds of places, right from the earliest days. And he had to have all his poor sons laboriously change the history so that it all agreed. But the difficulty is, when he died, He had to ensure that all his sons had children and grandchildren, because these manuscripts continued to be found in all kinds of different places, written in different styles of writing at different ages, from the year about 100 AD or 125 AD to about the year 1000 AD. There are 4,000 different manuscripts. Ones like the Alexandrinus and the Sinaiticus. By the way, I'd appreciate, loved ones, if somebody will drop the screen, and we'll all promise not to scream if you'll drop it to 45 degrees. The Alexandrinus and the Sinaiticus are in the British Museum. The Alexandrinus is a complete manuscript of the whole Bible and is 350 AD in age, according to carbon-14 method, which works within hundreds of years, but not when you're talking about millions of years. And of course the style of the writing also is used to date them. And the Sinaiticus, just opposite to it in the corridor, is 450 AD. Nothing corresponds in other ancient history to this kind of documentation. And the unbelievable thing is, of course, the manuscript that you can find in the museum in Manchester. And it is just on its own completely. It's a scrap of John's Gospel, which is exactly the same as the account of John 18, verses 31 through 33 in the bigger manuscripts. And it is dated by carbon-14 and by style of writing at about 130, 140 AD. That is only about 30 or 40 years after John wrote the Gospel. And of course you can see the importance of that. That here you have an actual piece of writing that some people looked at who were actually contemporaries of the people who wrote the Bible. That's the kind of manuscript evidence you have.